I don't want to run out of time for questions, so we will take questions. I know we can't address individual cases or things like that. Sometimes a question may apply to a more broad scenario, so I might include it if it's kind of even a personal question. But you can answer it broadly. I know people would have to get a consult with you to really go through their case. So as we think about the questions, I guess one of the first questions would be, how is Dana-Farber funded? And then how does someone donate? That's one of the questions. And I'll open this up to the whole panel. So you might not answer every single question, but.
I can simply say that we are so lucky because at Dana-Farber, because we have extraordinary philanthropy that makes a lot possible that would not otherwise be possible. Obviously, we're based on traditional models as well, and I'd love Jacob to comment more on the insurances and all that sort of stuff. But from a strictly research point of view at Dana-Farber, we are very fortunate to have partnerships with the National Cancer Institute, with our pharma partners, and also, as I say, one of the key things is philanthropy that keeps the lights on, quite literally, and allows us to provide a level of care that's that much better, in my opinion, as a result. But that's how we operate. But I would very much stress that everyone gets the same care. It's not there's no kind of tiers or anything. It's nothing like that at all. Everyone who comes to see us gets exactly the same care, the same access to the same options, I should stress. Jacob, I'd love you to comment more.
I would just say that as far as funding sources, we have, a clinical source of funding, and we have research sources of funding. As far as the clinical sources of funding, these are traditional payers, private insurance, Medicare, Mass Health, et cetera. And on the research side, the primary forms of funding would be government, so NCI-based funds, funding that comes from our industry sponsors or industry collaborators in the form of grants. And then, as Paul mentioned, philanthropy. So it makes for somewhat of a complex web of funding. It's obviously crucial to the operations. And as Paul said, the philanthropy that we receive, I think, really allows us to do some very special, unique things, and to sort of find niches where those other traditional sources of funding, whether it be NCI funding support or from industry, might not reach. It allows us to fill a particular niche, and that has been, extraordinarily valuable to our program. So I think if somebody's interested in donating to the Institute, there's a couple of different channels that can be utilized in that way. And I would encourage anybody to speak with one of us as their providers at an upcoming visit about how that can be done, and we would then in turn put them in contact with people from our philanthropy group at Dana-Farber who can really provide individualized guidance. And I think Paul and I have I think made this a priority for patients who are interested in donating, as well as other members of our team who have really benefited from the philanthropic generosity of our patients, is to really give patients in that context an understanding of where that funding is going to be utilized.
Mm-hmm.
Jenny, it's made all the difference, and I think that's what's so extraordinary. And it's believe you me, coming from Britain, for example, these traditions of philanthropy do not necessarily exist outside of the US. They don't. They're very different. There's much more of the government takes care of it, doesn't it? Well, no, it doesn't actually. And in the US, we are so lucky to have the generosity and spirit of our patients and their families, because it has made an enormous difference in our program. On the laboratory side, it's been extraordinary. I mean, Ken is amazing at how he's generated a huge bed of resources to fuel the drives in the lab. But on the clinical side, we've perhaps not been as so high profile, but having said that, we've benefited from unbelievably important people important, I should say, philanthropy from people in making the difference. And I think I just want to especially acknowledge that. And we're so lucky that there are a number of families now, in particular certain donors, who are really committed to changing myeloma, and I think they will, because unfortunately, especially now as COVID sort of works its way through with all its ramifications, I suspect the funding environment will become much more challenging, actually. So I'm very hopeful we can still keep our momentum going.
Great. Okay. Thank you for sharing. Okay, we're going to jump into some of these specific questions. Art is saying he has not developed immunity to the Pfizer vaccine, so COVID-related myeloma question. Anyone have any suggestions? Myeloma patient in remission, not taking any treatment at the time. So
I would say there's emerging data on that particular point, and Paul has been very much involved in leading some of the efforts around our COVID-related myeloma research. And we, for example, are participating in a study, leading a study in which our patients are being tracked for their response to COVID vaccination over time. Just in this past week, there was an article published in Lancet Hematology by a group in Great Britain looking at responses to, I think it was Pfizer and AstraZeneca. And I think that the overall antibody response rate in that study among myeloma patients was about 66%. Mm-hmm. So they are finding that there's a subset of patients who are not generating antibody. And there's probably multiple reasons there. One of the leading indicators in that study of why patients weren't responding to treatment is they had active myeloma. Not so much on treatment versus not treatment, but whether they had active myeloma or controlled myeloma. So that was one predictor, probably the most important predictor of response. So I would encourage any patient to pay attention to that, but also realize that we don't yet know as a field how to respond to such data. Like, in the absence of an immune response, should we be giving, for example, a third administration of the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccine? And we don't know that yet. And those studies that are looking at that question haven't yet been published to provide us with the perspectives that we need in order to advise patients. I think the other point that we make to patients frequently is that the immune response to these vaccines or to an infection is quite complex, and that immune globulin is only measuring one component of the immune response, and patients may have engendered some responsiveness or immunity to the COVID or whatever they may be vaccinated to, even without those immunoglobulins present.
Yeah,
I love comments also from Mylene and Kathy, please. But Jen, I just think Jacob's covered the critical points. I think there's studies now from Israel which are showing something quite similar to what you just heard about and seen in Great Britain. But I would stress this, that the antibody response may not last for very long. So I have one of my patients who's participating in a Johns Hopkins study, and she mounted a robust antibody response initially, and then after 3 months it had gone. Having said that, and she was obviously understandably alarmed, but to Jacob's point, there are two components: the innate immune system and the humoral immune system, and the innate system, we believe, may be as important, if not more so. So I think the idea of a booster or additional shots, I think annual vaccination is probably, wouldn't you agree, Jacob, going to be a must do. I suspect it's just a question of if there's a 6-month interval at which a booster needs to be given.
I just wanted to say also, we've been in conversation with our infectious disease specialists about this, because this question comes up every day when we see our patients. And in addition to the vaccine, it's important for cancer patients and myeloma patients in particular to still practice the recommended safe practices such as social distancing, wearing masks. And even if they have been vaccinated, that it's important to just protect yourself, be careful, be alert, and stay out of crowds, etc. And though again, there's so much we don't know at this point, but patients have a responsibility to take care of themselves too and be careful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
And depending on the status of your myeloma too, right? So
yeah.
if you're in a very strong remission and you've finished treatment a while ago and you're still, your T cell, I mean, you're not getting any frequent infections or anything, you might say, okay, well, I'm going to wear a mask while I get on an airplane. And, you know, depending on how open your state is, you know, be a little different with your friends and family. But if you're on active treatment or you've got active myeloma, like what you're saying, Dr. Laubach, too, is like maybe the responses are just based on your T cell status and how your immune system is just doing overall. I have other questions for Eileen and Kathy also. So Natalie's asking, what should one do when hospital policy is to distance the patient from both the doctor and the nursing staff, where she can just call a central line and just talk to a receptionist? I mean, that's tough, right?
Yeah, that's very tough. You know, we currently have a policy at Dana-Farber about the visitors that are allowed to come in with the patients, which is, you know, since the COVID pandemic started, it's different than what they were used to in the past. And it's very difficult for patients. As nurses, we feel really bad that families can't come with the patients. And it can be very difficult at times, but, you know, we try to incorporate having a family member on the telephone during the visit, encourage them to call us if they have questions. It's very difficult. Hopefully, as more and more people get vaccinated and as the COVID numbers die down a little bit, this will change. But currently, we have practices that are very strict in our clinical practice, which can be difficult. And believe me, we understand how difficult it is, but we try to do the best we can.
I know. I'm so.
Yeah, it's hard. I had a conversation the other day with a patient that really, she comes from Connecticut to Boston. She wants her husband to be there. He has to wait out in the garage. And, you know, my heart breaks, but there's really nothing I can do. You know, like there's very strict criteria about who can have visitors in the rooms with them and under what circumstances. And, you know, I just tried to explain to her that, you know, we really feel her pain in all this, but it's really to protect her and everybody else around her.
Right.
So,
I mean, in the current environment, I mean, I think, you know, it's difficult if they can't have their support system, but I also believe they truly understand the reason why. So explaining to them. And I think, as Eileen said, we have lots of open communication. I mean, they have the iPhone and their support person, their husband, their spouse or partner is on the phone and we can see them or they're on the speaker phone. We can, you know, and then of course we give them access to give us a call if they need to and have any questions. You know, it is difficult, but I mean, they understand. There's so many unknowns out there.
Yeah, well, we're all trying to make it work, right?
Right, exactly, exactly.
I think right now people have COVID fatigue and they're starting to see, you know, restrictions getting lifted and why can't, you know, and we still have to be very careful. It's still out there. Even though the numbers are down, and Paul can attest to this, he sees patients in the hospital with COVID all the time, and it's still very much out there. We still have to be very careful and vigilant.
I would echo that. We're running, as Jacob so nicely alluded, we're doing a number of things. A number of colleagues are working in the COVID space, and one particular study we're running is repurposing a drug that is used to target blood vessel injury and transplant to COVID-19 in its most advanced form. And I have to say, Jen, it's been the most extraordinary experience for me as a clinician to see up close the really severe form of COVID, and it's devastating, quite devastating, and it's there. You know, we have a patient right now we're evaluating for our clinical trial who's just 46 years old, and another gentleman who's 55. You know, this argument that it's gone away is absolutely not correct. We have to be super careful. But I'm very encouraged by what Jacob shared, which is the data on the vaccines. That's going to make a huge difference in the longer term.
Right.
But variants are going to become a challenge. And I think there's a question about variants from the audience. Perhaps this will answer it. We will probably need repeated vaccinations. We will definitely need to be repurposing our vaccines to meet the challenge of the variants, because unlike influenza, unfortunately, SARS-CoV-2 has a much greater mutagenic thrust. and there are many, 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 many thousands more variants than we see typically with flu.
Okay, well, we'll keep wearing our masks.
Well, we wear them too, so.
Okay, I'm going to ask you, on everyone on the panel, we have so many questions. It's almost impossible with just like 15 minutes left to answer them all. So I'll continue asking questions, but if you're not answering a question or not speaking on the panel, maybe you want to jump in and answer some. I will ask some from James and George and kind of combine them. Is there a difference? Oh, so someone just answered that question. So George is asking, what's the difference between extramedullary myeloma and bone versus non-bone severity in bone versus non-bone, and how do you treat that differently? Dr. Lovak, do you want to answer that question?
Sure. So the previous question had been about light chain disease, and I'll just make a quick point to say that light chain disease definitely has some unique characteristics, particularly as we evaluate and monitor kidney function, because after all, it is the light chain that most often leads to the so-called myeloma kidney. So we are very mindful of that, but overall, if appropriate steps are taken to reduce the concentration of the light chain, the prognosis of patients as it relates to the duration of their response and the duration of their survival is equivalent to other forms of multiple myeloma. Now, bone involvement, as we all know, is really a hallmark of multiple myeloma, perhaps more so than any other cancer, and certainly more than any other hematologic cancer. We do distinguish pure bone myeloma from extramedullary disease involving soft tissues. And we've actually published some data some years ago in a study led by Cindy Varga and other groups have as well, to show that extramedullary myeloma, whether it's purely bone extramedullary or soft tissue, can have an adverse prognosis. And so patients with extramedullary myeloma certainly warrant a individualized approach that can be, I don't like to use the word aggressive, but certainly intensive, to ensure that we're suppressing the clone which is leading to emergence of this extramedullary disease, and then very closely and carefully monitoring for the presence or absence of extramedullary disease as we progress with our treatment. And that most often involves sophisticated or advanced imaging techniques like PET-CT imaging or MRI or CT imaging.
Okay, great.
Jennifer, if I could just add, I had mentioned when I accepted the invitation to participate here, I have a family commitment at 1:30, so I need to go. But in doing so, I just want to thank you. I want to thank the audience, and I want to thank Paul, Eileen, and Kathy as well. And just say very briefly, as I think we've conveyed today, it is an honor to come to work every day. You know, I think we're inspired every day by our patients, and driven to both care effectively for them and advance the field. I'd also just like to thank you and your team for the outstanding work that you do. I mean, there's no question that patient education and advocacy is a huge component of why we are where we are in this field. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Labak, and enjoy your family Saturday.
Beautiful, Jacob.
Thank you, Jacob.
Thanks to everybody.
Thank you, Jacob, very, very much. And Jen, I was going to say, I have this on my calendar until 2:00. So if we want to keep going, I'm fine with it. I mean, I don't want to jump the gun here, but maybe I'm available for 35 minutes.
A lot of questions. So maybe for Eileen and Kathy, we have a question from Nancy. What happens if cells for transplant are collected at one institution and the patient then has to move across the country? Is there only option to have the stem cell transplant at that original institution? Or can those be shipped?
I believe they can be shipped, and I think we have done that. Paul, is that true?
Sorry, guys, I was multitasking there for a second, but no, I apologize. No, yes, we do. Yes, you can. It's absolutely feasible, and that's not a major problem. We're getting in a slightly sticky situation with stem cell collection, where insurances are demanding that if stem cell collection occurs, then transplant must follow, because in the United States we're so fortunate because we've got so many other treatment options that for an important subset of patients who are transplant eligible, we can actually put off transplant. And what's happening is they're not actually using the stem cells. So the insurances are sort of throwing up their hands and saying, well, wait a second, if you're going to do it, just do it. The good news here is that we have newer strategies for stem cell mobilization. And so the old thinking of you have to be stem cell collected early just to be on the safe side is correct. But if for any reason it's delayed, it shouldn't be thought as not possible, because you can, with agents, one particular one called Mosavil, to really help get the stem cells collected if and when you need them.
Yeah, we just wrote an article about that. It was like 5 to 14x the amount of stem cells. Yeah. Okay. So Eileen and Kathy also can. So how does the nursing team and the medical team at Dana-Farber address the plethora of treatment side effects? How do the patients communicate with you about those issues, and what kind of support is provided to address them? That's a very common question.
Yeah. So each visit the patient has, we encourage them to share with us what they're experiencing. And as Paul said before, sometimes they underreport things to the doctors, and then the nurses hear an earful. It's important for us to address them during the visit, for people to communicate. A big part of nursing is communication and listening to what the patient's issues are. Again, we have other avenues for patients to contact us by phone, by patient gateway, email messaging. It's interesting when I have a new patient just starting chemo for the first time. I always tell them, please call us, because if we don't hear from you, we kind of assume everything is fine. Mm-hmm. And that's not always the case. Somebody may be at home suffering from something that we could help them with, and it's really important for them to not be afraid to call us. We encourage people to call us, and for them to feel comfortable with the mechanisms in place for them to reach us if they need to. They all have our phone numbers. They know how to get a hold of us, and we do encourage that. It's really important to keep the communication lines open.
Okay. Kathy? Oh, we can't hear you, Kathy.
Can you hear me? No, yes. Okay. I was going to say that also, depending on what class of drug the patient is going on. So we have proteasome inhibitors, we have the immunomodulatory drugs, we have the CD38 monoclonal antibodies, and within each of those classes of drug, they have known side effects. So if somebody's on a proteasome inhibitor, such as carfilzomib or Velcade, bortezomib, we know that they could reactivate herpes zoster. So we make sure that patients are on antivirals. So for that class of drug, immunomodulatory drugs, we need to make sure that patients, we know there's a propensity for an increased risk of a deep vein thrombosis. So making sure patients are on anticoagulation. The immunomodulatory drugs, also making sure patients are on also antivirals. Patients are getting high doses of dexamethasone, so we want to make sure they're on antimicrobial drugs and maybe something like Bactrim. So knowing what therapy the patient is going on, we know what to make sure that they're taking as part of supportive care while they're on therapy. And obviously, when patients are on therapy, and if they are having any type of adverse event, we can obviously delay treatment until that adverse event resolves or do a dose modification.
Mm-hmm. And one thing we always try to provide some sort of written information about the drug that the patient is on, in addition to the verbal discussion with the patient, because oftentimes they leave the visit and totally forget everything that you said. So it's important for them to have something to back up what and if they have a question, sometimes having written information.
Exactly.
So speak up, right? That's the message.
Yes,
speak
absolutely.
Up. I think I went for 6 months being on a triple combination at the beginning of my care, and I just felt totally psychotic and And I had no idea that it was caused by the Dex. And
Yeah.
when 6 months in, I finally said something, and then the nurse said, "Oh, well, we can help with that, by doing this and this." I'm like, "Oh, well, I should have said something. I just thought, oh, well, this is myeloma treatment. I just have to suffer through it. And yeah, I'm sorry, family, that I'm so terrible."
Right. Well, we'd always tell patients, probably out of all the side effects, the DEX is out of all the drugs they take or for the therapy for myeloma, the steroids are probably the hardest to handle. So, I mean, as Eileen said, we give them booklets and pamphlets and written material so that when they're at home, that they can read it, in an atmosphere that, all their senses aren't going off when they're in the clinic and there's so much going on. But I just think that, if you tell them up front, everybody's more prepared to handle the side effects. If you say to them, dexamethasone has XYZ side effects, you may experience these. And if you do, call us, we can dose reduce, we can hold therapy, etc. So there's always an algorithm or scenario that we can make sure that we can, to help the patient be able to tolerate the therapy through, again, good supportive care, dose modification, delay in treatment for their counts to recover. But, just telling patients up front what to expect and knowing that expectation, they're more readily able to handle the therapy. And call us, as Eileen said, communication is key.
Mm-hmm. Another question about just connecting with doctors at Dana-Farber. So are you doing telemedicine outside of Massachusetts? Because I know there are cross state line restrictions. And then how does somebody go about making a new appointment as a new patient? And what do you do right now with COVID as it stands today for a new patient appointment?
So the new patient number, do you want me to give it to you?
Sure.
I have it. It's 877-442-3324. And that's the referral for new patients. I do have some patients that are out of state that I do telemedicine. They're not new patients, obviously. Paul does the consults, but some of the follow-ups we do out of state. I'm not sure if it's legal. I hope it is, but
it is absolutely fine. Yeah, no.
Okay.
Short answer, absolutely fine. And we actually welcome them because we obviously are very sensitive to the fact that traveling across state lines is difficult. I think there are some insurances that are a bit difficult about that, but we try to be as accommodating as we possibly can.
Yeah. And I think during the pandemic, there were a lot of things waived. A lot of the rules were waived. So it is something that we are doing for a lot of our long-term follow-up patients that were coming in once a month. We're now having them come in every 3 months instead. And then the 2 months in between, we do a televisit, which is really, most of the patients really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you for that. And so I'm trying to decide which one to do next. So Dr. Richardson, can you just quickly answer, you mentioned a neuropathy drug that could, or something that could help with the neuropathy. Do you just want to mention that for Art?
Oh, sure. I mean, there are not lots of strategies to manage neuropathy. I wish I could tell you there's a magic bullet. Unfortunately, there isn't, but there are a whole constellation of strategies. And this is where actually our partnership with our nursing partners is so close and so important because it's made all the difference. It goes from the very simple emollients, the use of various supplements, to the more sophisticated in the context of the use of certain agents that numb or remove neuropathic pain. And then there are simple strategies, and this was again all born out of the close partnership with nursing. The use of intravenous normal saline with the administration of bortezomib. People say, what on earth are you talking about? It's actually a neurobiological phenomenon that you actually improve small vessel perfusion around nerve endings at the time of administration of a drug. You reduce free radical injury to the nerve ending. Not widely known, but real. The partnership of a steroid with bortezomib on the day of and the day after reduces the inflammatory signal and improves outcome. But in terms of an actual magic bullet, we're doing research into new drugs that may reverse neuropathy, but for actual FDA approved agents, they revolve really around neuralgic agents, such as I'd love Kathy and Eileen to chime in here. We use gabapentin, but there are other drugs that we use that are better, and also some of the various tricyclics and so on that can be helpful. But I'd love Kathy and Eileen to comment, please, Jen.
Well, we did. Oh, go on, Eileen. That's fine.
Well, I think, it's important for people to realize that as Paul was saying, the drugs like gabapentin, they're going to treat the symptoms. It doesn't take the neuropathy away. So you have to look at what the underlying cause of the neuropathy is. Is it the disease? Is it a drug-related cause? If it is drug-related, we try to tweak the dosing a little bit, maybe lower the dosing. There's others, in addition to using medication, there's other supportive care like acupuncture, massage therapy that we've found helpful in our patients. But I think one thing I find is that a lot of people underreport their neuropathy, and because they're afraid to tell us because they think it's going to affect their treatment. And it's so important to do that.
Or they think being taken off will totally change their care, and there are other things that you can do.
Right.
So don't let the neuropathy get too bad, because that's a bad one.
I mean, dose modification along the lines that Eileen and Dr. Richardson was saying, the gabapentin, also these tricyclics. Also, we do vitamin B, vitamin B12, and vitamin B6. They're very important for nerve function. And, as we get older, sometimes our vitamin B12 stores have depleted, and, people can have that tingling and numbness, and they could even ask their provider to maybe do a vitamin B12 titer to see if that's even, exaggerating what they maybe already have, and they may need some type of supplementation, so they could start there too.
Okay, great to know. Well, I think one of the original questions for the whole panel was about your clinical trials. As patients, and I think I want to end with that because I want this to be kind of a longer discussion, but we since we were supposed to end at an earlier time, we won't take you all the way to the top of the hour. Can you describe Dana-Farber's clinical trials, how you discuss clinical trials with patients, what types of trials you have open, and what's the process to join your clinical trials?
Well, I can probably start, right, Eileen, if that's okay, just to sort of give a framework, and then if Eileen and Kathy can dive into the details. We have a comprehensive program. So, for example, under the leadership of my colleague Irene Gobriel, we have a very comprehensive program in smoldering myeloma, an MGUS, which offers therapeutic opportunities as well as studies that are actually, looking at descriptive things such as genetics of smoldering myeloma. Once we move into the newly diagnosed setting, we have a whole array of options available, and these range from treatment options for older patients to options that are available for transplant eligible patients. And we're focusing on the role of quadruplets, so-called quads, where we use the backbone agents of proteasome inhibition, immunomodulation, and steroid, and we're adding antibodies to it. And we actually have, at the moment, 3 studies addressing this, one for a group of patients who are older, one for patients who might benefit from a carfilzomib-based approach, and Jacob's leading a very exciting approach, which is combining our favorite platform, RVD, with isatuximab, which is an exciting new CD38 antibody that's FDA approved in the relapse setting, but not in the upfront setting. And then once we move into the relapse refractory space, Jen, we have a whole array of agents available at different stages of relapse refractory disease. And what we're seeking to try and do there is combine best options in immune therapy, for example. And this is where we're very well integrated with the leadership of Adam Sperling and Omar Nadim into our CAR T space, which is scientifically led by Nikhil Munshi, who obviously was the head of the KARMA study that just got the approval for ide-cel. And then we have a whole array of other strategies looking at not just immune approaches, but what we call the cell mods, which are very exciting new drugs that manipulate the immune system as well, but also more conventional approaches with combinations of improved drugs to better improve outcome, and as well as brand new drugs. And then we're looking further down the line, as it were, in what we call our sort of phase 1 space, at a variety of agents where we're bringing very new ideas with entirely new mechanisms of action into place. So we cover all the spectrum of opportunities, and we offer to patients clinical trials, as part of the continuum of their care. And I'm going to now hand over to Eileen and Kathy to go into more details.
Okay.
I think one thing that patients need to understand that anytime they start a new therapy, including a clinical trial, there needs to be informed consent between the patient and their physician. So that's part of, we call it a screening visit and a consenting visit, where the physician will go over the therapy with the patient. So the informed consent, and there's always certain labs, X-ray tests, or other things that are involved in the screening process that are basically put there for the patient's safety. And it's important for us to review their history in great detail. And then, there's behind the scenes, there's what we call an eligibility checklist that has to get reviewed by the regulatory people and approved often by, if it's a sponsored trial, by the sponsor. And so the whole process of getting on a clinical trial can sometimes take a couple of weeks, basically. But there is a very specific process to doing this, and the nursing plays a very important role in coordinating all of this and making sure it all happens. In addition to, people behind the scenes.
Right. Yeah. Clinical trials are, carefully controlled research studies, trying to find better ways for treatment, providing good care to patients. So if when one of the physicians wants to put a patient on a clinical trial, and if I'm running that clinical trial, it's my job is, I'm going to take that patient, I'll be with that patient throughout the whole study. And, they're obviously to advocate for that patient, give good supportive care, and really explaining any of the complexities. As Eileen was saying, that patients have to meet an eligibility. And obviously there's imaging, there's blood work. Unfortunately, there's always the bone marrow biopsy. And, and there's research and technologies, a better understanding of myeloma. And now in some of the studies, they're, especially with phase 1s or newly diagnosed patients, besides having a screening bone marrow biopsy, because we're restaging the disease, sometimes throughout the study, they'll be at certain points, they'll be wanting to do another bone marrow biopsy, which is obviously very uncomfortable for patients. But the information we gain from that bone marrow biopsy, if a patient is in a complete response or if a patient has progressed on that therapy, that information is crucial for us, looking forward, looking at newer therapies down the road, and see how, patients are responding depending on what their isotype of their disease is. So behind the scenes, and as I was saying, there's a lot that goes on that the patients are, pretty unaware of. But obviously, as a clinical research nurse and been doing this for a long time, the benefits, are certainly there for the patients, and, looking for, gaining better responses to therapy, overall survival has increased, and patients are having a better quality of life with these newer therapies.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm so tempted to just ask a few more questions if you don't mind.
Fine, absolutely.
Okay, so Peter's asking, what does it mean when the M spike goes down but the light chains go up?
That's an excellent question. Measuring disease and knowing progression versus non-progression is becoming more, I'd love to say it's a science, Jen, but it's becoming more of an art form, I think. We do sometimes see what we call light chain escape. And what that means is that the clones of myeloma that are producing the heavy chain are being dealt with or disappearing, but clones that are producing light chain are actually potentially increasing. So, however, that's not a black and white thing. And sometimes we've seen a phenomenon where light chains go up as the myeloma actually is being, it's almost like a flare, as the myeloma is actually being very successfully treated. So it's a very much a conversation with your provider to say, what's going on here? Is this good or bad? And the important thing to know is that the essence of assessing disease response is getting data points over time. So sometimes if the numbers go up, please don't panic. Just think, okay, check again. Let's see where we're going. Final comment, infection can often drive up a light chain and do so artificially. And then as the infection settles down, the things get better. Interestingly, some of my patients have reported that after their vaccinations, they've seen their light chain spike a little bit. And that makes sense, but they then go down.
Interesting. And usually when you have an infection, the kappa and lambda both go up, right?
Well, that's a great question, because actually sometimes it's not quite so proportionate, because the neoplastic clone is so much more sensitive to inflammatory stimulus. So as a result, it actually, do you see the monoclonal, the light chain that reflects the monoclonal piece can be actually more reactive.
I learned something new on every single roundtable we do. Very important comment. Okay, we have another question. I think we'll end with this one. What differentiates Dana-Farber, and we talked about this at the beginning, and he noted that, but what differentiates Dana-Farber from other cancers that treat myeloma patients specifically? And I'll let you all have the last word.
Well, I think because, we have myeloma, we have some of we have the best myeloma specialists in the world working there. I mean, Dana-Farber is a research institute, and I think that we pride ourselves in looking at new discoveries, having a better understanding of the disease of myeloma, looking at new drug discoveries, partnership with what goes on in our laboratory, partnership with pharmaceutical companies, looking at their drugs and trialing them. It's a great place to work at Dana-Farber. It's innovative. The technology is great. I mean, this is the most exciting time in medicine. Everybody's benefiting from throughout the world with the treatments and in clinical trials that we participate in at Dana-Farber and other, obviously academic institutes also.
Great,
and I have to say that almost every time I see patients, at least one of them tells me how kind and helpful everybody at Dana-Farber is, from the people that help them park their car in the garage to, the administrative assistants that check them in, the lab, every single department. It's just really kind people that are there to help them. And in addition to the work that we do for trying to fight and find new treatments for this cancer, it's all about people, really, and taking care of people and being kind to people. And it really is, it's a small place, Dana-Farber, believe it or not, and we are able to give personalized, good care to people that makes a difference, I think, in their lives and in their, the navigation through this disease.
Dr. Richardson, you get the final word. Thank you.
Well, yeah, well, I would just say it is just a full disclosure. It is National Nurses Week, so just bear that in mind. And I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say this genuinely. I think what sets Dana-Farber apart, frankly, I really mean this. The oncology nursing at Dana-Farber is superb. It is quite superb, and it's at the highest standard. And what I'm so struck by, coming especially from the British tradition, the Nurses Week, oddly enough, is timed for Florence Nightingale's birthday. Florence Nightingale, the founder of modern nursing. And it's very interesting to me, because I think what I think is so important is that we're a partnership. It's not a vertical relationship. It's truly horizontal. I mean, we are partners. And I think Eileen got it beautifully, that what I particularly love at Dana-Farber is that's the kind of spirit of our group anyway, and our floor on Y7, is that everyone views each other as colleagues and partners, and that commitment to the patient and that commitment to excellence really transcends all of it. And, I particularly acknowledge on our floor, for example, the Y7 clinical coordinators are superb. They go the extra mile every time. And they are such a pleasure to work with, because they care about the patient and they realize what we're doing. And I was just touched by a final anecdote. A lovely patient, a gentleman from New York, came to see me, who was actually a rabbi. And he said to the clinical coordinator as he was leaving, he said, "This has been one of the best visits I've ever had at any institution." He said, "The people are kind, the people listen, and they clearly care." And he used the final term. He said, "It's been a miracle." And that's why I love personally coming to Dana-Farber every day.
Well, yeah, I want to cry when I think about how much care and love you put into the work that you do every day for patients. It's very meaningful and it is so appreciated. So thank you, Eileen, and thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Dr. Richardson, so much for everything you do for patients every day.